when I was 10 years old and my mother went to the laundromat, I decided that I was going to climb a tree in the front yard that was a little too difficult for me to just climb without any assistance because the lowest branch was maybe about 5 feet taller than me. And so I decided that what I would do, which my mother certainly wouldn't have allowed me to do, was I was going to climb up on top of her car, on the roof of the car. And it was still a little bit too high up there, so I decided, you know what, I can do it. So I decided to jump off my mother's roof up into the air and grab onto the tree branch. I left a dent in my mom's car roof, but luckily my mom's really short. She never noticed. And I almost got it, but I slipped and I broke my wrist. And I was in a lot of pain, but more than the pain, I was afraid of my mother hearing this story and the consequences of that, which I knew would be not just one, but twofold. One, the first thing would be I'd be punished, I'd be in big trouble. But the second thing, because I knew my family well, this would be a story that would circulate until I died, whatever year that would be. It would be one of the stories that was shared to explain how Laurie is one sandwich short of a picnic. And I only knew this because I had aunts in their 80s, and I knew all of the humiliating stories about them from when they were my age, because they were shared every Thanksgiving. I didn't want any of this. So I sat there with ice at the kitchen table, and I plotted out what I was going to do when my mother got home. And first thing I did was I showed her my hand and said, I don't think it's broken, but it kind of went, It was very, and it was definitely broken. And she asked me what I did, and I said, I fell down the stairs. This story held until I was in my mid-30s. And I eventually accidentally let slip about that time when I jumped off the car and left a dent in the roof. So, luckily, I got into my adulthood without having to deal with this story. And I'm only sharing that story with you because it is a funny story from my childhood. But then, since that time, when I was 10 years old, I've done lots of other things that I'm not going to tell you to get a cheap laugh, because I'm either still embarrassed by them, or I think that if you knew about them, you'd think less of me. And they're really things that I want to keep private. And luckily, because I have the social capital of a collar, and I have enough money in my bank account, almost all the time, when I do things I don't want you to know about, you don't find out. There are plenty of people who don't have this kind of luxury. If you were there this morning at 7 o'clock, there were about 80 or 90 of them having breakfast because they don't have the money to protect their privacy and their need, right? And anytime somebody's exposed in that way, it's given to the general populace this opportunity to judge them, to make decisions about what they've done and who they are. Think about it. If you're going to go later on to have brunch and you're going to stop at the liquor store, you live in downtown Jersey City, no one's going to look twice at you. If you live in a poor neighborhood and you walk into a liquor store, what's going to happen? Everybody's going to stand there and go, right? Happens all the time. The guy who I drive by when I get off the turnpike to get to church, panhandling Tommy, his knees are hanging off of him every day. You can just tell. This man has made some mistakes, and they're written all over who he is. And it's something everybody can see on him. Last week, we had the story of Nicodemus. And Nicodemus is like me. He's a respected member of the clergy. And that's why, when he goes to talk to Jesus, he does it at night. Because everybody knows that Jesus hangs out with sinners and is a notorious heretic. And Nicodemus wants to have a conversation with him, but he wouldn't dream of going to see Jesus in broad daylight because he'd risk his social capital if he did that. So he waits till he goes at night. And this morning, on purpose, by the writer of John's Gospel, I am sure, we're introduced to somebody else who has a nice long conversation with Jesus. The Samaritan woman at the well. But she's not talking to Jesus at night. She's talking to Jesus at broad daylight. And not only in the middle of the day, but at noon, sitting at a well. This woman comes around midday to this well. And if any of us were from the Mideast, from an agrarian community, we would know that the last time you want to go draw water and then walk home is 12 o'clock in the afternoon in the middle of the desert. It is hot and horrible. All the other women have gone to draw water from the well before the sun even went up, so they could be home before they got scorched. No sunscreen 2,000 years ago, right? So there Jesus is, and here comes this woman to the well at noon. And we can assume that the reason she is there at noon is because she doesn't want to deal with all the women who were at the well at 4:35 a.m. Because they all know who she is. Her story is written on her, just like it's written on Tommy. Everybody knows her deal in her neighborhood. And she doesn't want to hear the tongue clicking and the whispers or greet their stares. So she'd rather get sunburnt and go at noon. And she meets Jesus sitting there. And Jesus asks her for a cup of water. Which, by the way, just shows that there's something wrong with Jesus that's either equally or worse wrong than there is with the Samaritan woman, because there's two reasons why that's bad. First of all, she's a woman, and men do not talk with women that they do not know or are not related to. That's number one. Second of all, he's a Jew. He's not from this neighborhood. It's clear that he's a Jew, and Jews and Samaritans do not talk to one another. They are rivals. They are enemies. They have different beliefs about God. And so she's shocked. Almost the way that the people in her neighborhood are shocked by her. That this man would dare ask her for a drink. And so she asks how it is that he would ask her for a drink. And Jesus says, well, if you knew who you're talking to, you would have asked me for living water. And this is something that intrigues the woman. When Jesus says living water, the first thing that this woman thinks about is a river or a stream, any place but this stupid well, where you have to draw the water bucket by bucket in the public square to be scrutinized and judged by everybody who walks by. And when Jesus says he has access to living water, that's the kind of social capital this woman wants. If she had living water, she would never have to come back to this well and be looked up and down at by everybody who comes here again. She could avoid them completely. So now she's interested. And she says to Jesus, "Sir, tell me more about this living water." And Jesus says, "Well, I will. Why don't you go get your husband first?" I know exactly how the woman at the well felt when this man told her to go get her husband. It's happened to me hundreds of times when I have been in the hospital and somebody has asked me about my husband, or when I have been at a conservative church. It happened to me once at the mosque at my last church, where somebody's asked me, "Oh, what beautiful children. What does your husband do?" And there's always that moment when my heart pounds in my neck, and I think, when I say, "Oh, Rosemary is a professor at Drew," what's going to happen next? I know exactly what it's like. My mouth dries up like a potsherd, and lots of times I'll say something like, "Look at the squirrel!" And so the woman says, "Well, I don't have a husband, sir." And Jesus says, yeah, I know you don't have a husband because you've had 5 husbands. And the guy you're with now isn't even your husband. What you said is true. He knows everything about her. But there's something else that happens. This woman realizes that Jesus has known who she was since he asked her for that drink. And he's offering her this water that's a living water. That when he gives it to her will make it so that she's never thirsty again. And suddenly she has this realization that Jesus wouldn't be having this conversation with her if he thought her past defined her, if he was interested in all the labels that people have stuck on her. And she comes to realize that this is the first human being perhaps in her life as an adult who has looked at her for who she is, as opposed to what she's done. Perhaps the first human being in years who's given her eye contact and talked to her and saw in her a human being who is not defined by all of the labels that people in Samaria have given her. And she starts to, perhaps for the first time in a very long time, begin to hope. And she says to him, "Sir, we know that one day the Messiah will come." And I imagine that when she says that hope that she dare not speak until this moment in her life is that this man who is staring her in the face and offering her living water and knows who she is might be the one that she's been waiting for her whole life. And he says, "I am he." And then the disciples come back, and they're horrified to see Jesus talking to this woman who everybody knows what she did. And they don't say anything, but the woman can read it in their eyes, but she doesn't even care anymore because she's been given this living water. She's stared into the face of the Son of God and seen through him who she really is. And she, instead of avoiding the town, runs straight back to it and starts talking to people who she would not. She would do anything she could to get away from normally. And she starts yelling at them, "Listen, I met this man and he knows everything I ever did. Is it possible he's the Messiah?" One of the beautiful things about this story in John is that this is the first person who has ever identified Jesus in public as the Messiah. The woman from Samaria is the first evangelist. And not only that, she's a damn good one. Because all the people in Samaria come to run to find out who this man might be. And the end of the story is them turning and talking to this woman who they wouldn't have given the time of day a few hours before. And they turn to her, and everything is changed. And they say, "We don't believe that he's the Messiah anymore because of anything you've said. We believe it because we've seen it and felt it and heard it ourselves." She is a changed person inside. And that change that happened inside has completely transformed everyone around her. I'm going to offer you a few minutes to think about this question. When God looks at you, beyond all of the things that you've done, that you wish you hadn't done, and beyond all the things that you wish you had done that you didn't, and under all the labels that people have given you, when Jesus looks at you, who does he see? I invite you, if you would like to, write down a sentence or two about that question, and you can put it on one of the columns, or you can just sit in prayerful silence and reflection for the next couple of minutes.